Before we do get started, I want to introduce our panelists. So we have Mark Kuzno, who's the Director of Learning Solutions at Boeing. And we have Todd Talbert, who is the Vice President of Degreed. We have Dan Silverberg, who's the General Manager at Burning Glass. We have Victoria Marsick, who's a Professor of Teachers College at Columbia University. And we have Paul Fama, of Global Learning Leader at GE. So before we get started, I want to get a feeling from who's in the room. So raise your hand if you are an investor or entrepreneur looking to invest some money or create products for the learning and development industry. Any hands? Okay, good. Raise your hand if you are in learning and development in a corporate environment. Okay.
6.
Do we have vendors in the learning and development space here? Okay. And how about on the academic side? Good. Okay, so a really good mix here today. So that's great. So the way we're going to work it today is we're going to have each of our panelists introduce themselves and talk really briefly about a challenge or an opportunity or trend that they see in the industry. And then once we've heard a little bit from each of them, then we're going to really dive into your questions. So I'd like to start with Mark, please.
Hi, my name is Mark Kuzno. I am the Director of Learning Strategy, Design, and Technology for the Boeing Company. My organization is responsible for all development of new programs, whether it's for functional, technical, professional development, industrial skills, factory workers, leadership development. My team does that. We also have all the technology that enables that. So that's our learning management system, content management systems, performance support systems, and any of the technology stack that helps support it, as well as knowledge management for the enterprise. One of the things that we're going through that I see as a challenge across the board is HR is transforming. And it's through that transformation, we're relooking at how we interact with the business, how do we provide support, how do we provide things that we used to be very transactional can now be at the fingertips of the employees. And so with that, it's the transformation of our business model in supporting the enterprise. It's a transformation of the technology stack that enables that. It's how we're organized. And so then that flows down to the learning and development space, where we're also transforming how we approach learning for our company. And again, it's a lot of the things that Elliot had touched on earlier, as well as others. It's how do we get it, smaller, faster? We're really subscribing to the 5 moments of need and looking at, what's the right modality as you get to those moments of need. And how can you keep it engaging and just in time? I mean, ultimately, I would love to make learning invisible for the company so that people are learning all the time. I mean, right now you're in here learning, we're learning as a panel. Are you going to go back to your company and roster it in your learning management system that I went and got training? No, but it's getting that credit for learning as you're going through your day-to-day life. So I know that's the big challenge because of it's the design, so the learning strategy, the technology, and then knowledge management has typically been kind of something off in another function, or might have been engineering or not part of it. It's coming into the fold. It's actually probably going to be more of the centerpiece, because every time we create a class, we extract knowledge out of a subject matter expert, and then we put it into a class, but it's not then really easily accessed by the rest of the company. And if you think about that, it's really more knowledge curation, turning implicit into explicit. So that's, trying to reshape what does that mean within the company. So those are some of the challenges that we're working through right now at Boeing.
Thanks. So hi, everybody. My name is Todd Talbert. I'm the Vice President of Product Marketing with a vendor in the industry called Degreed. We essentially serve as a systems integrator for all of the things that Mark talked about that live in their stack, but also the things that happen outside of the company. So all of this invisible and ambient learning that people do but doesn't get tracked anywhere. And so the big challenge, I think, for us, or that we're building our business around, is exactly that. It's this idea that most of the learning that people do, not all of it, but most of it is happening outside of the traditional and formal classroom and learning management system environment. And because of that, it's getting harder and harder for companies to make that learning mean something inside the organization, to connect it to people's jobs, to their careers, to their performance. And so that's the big challenge that we're focused on.
Hi, my name is Dan Silverberg. I'm the general manager for a company called Burning Glass Technologies. Burning Glass collects labor market data at scale, and so we're able to communicate to the corporate learning environment the skills and competencies that exist in their current workforce, and then the skills and competencies that map to the strategies that the company is trying to implement. So we bridge much of what my two co-panelists have articulated. Our challenge that we see and that we're trying to improve upon is filling the void of the signals that are being articulated by the company's needs and by the workforce that has a set of skills. It's really almost a signaling or lack of data and awareness problem. The population doesn't necessarily understand the granular skills and competencies that are needed to achieve the strategic objectives that are put in front of them by their management team or by the organization as a whole, and the organizations themselves don't have a strong handle on the shape of their talent pool. My colleagues from GE and Boeing we work with in various ways, and I can attest to the fact that as sophisticated and organized they are, as broad-based as their populations are, they find it challenging to understand those talent pools. So in order to execute against what they're trying to accomplish, we partner with folks like Degreed to be able to articulate those signal crosses, be able to give learning opportunities at the right point in time to the populations on the things that matter most. Let's use a pretty simple example. Many organizations are trying to figure out a way to build mobile devices. Many people don't have engineering teams that have the skill set, the very granular technical skill set to build mobile devices. But they do have a population that allows them to front-end develop other technologies. If they knew that the skill set needed to build mobile devices was closely aligned to front-end development, we, as learning and development providers, could take the population of those with front-end skills, lightly train them up on one or two skills to then be mobile developers, and instead of having to go to the spot market, you could actually build that talent population. So those are some of the challenges that we as Burning Glass are helping companies like Boeing and GE, through partners like Degreed, overcome and hopefully create a better trained and effective talent population.
I'm Victoria Marsick, and I'm at Teachers College, Columbia University. I am in the Department of Organization and Leadership in Adult Learning and Leadership. So I probably represent the side of the user in many ways. People who come to study with us are people who are in the trenches with people, helping them learn and grow. And it's one thing to think about the very massive shift to micro-learning and to people who are taking in information differently and doing things differently with it. But people don't have a standard way of understanding things in the world. So a lot of it becomes how people make sense of it. And so some of the solution to learning and development is to how to understand the user side of it and what it is, how they make meaning of things, what they do with it, how does it fit with their whole life experience, in the sense that we have very diverse workforces today, and many of them have come from very diverse backgrounds. And so one thing that's delivered has multiple meanings in the workplace, and then people get surprised that in fact it doesn't get translated as was hoped. So we are in some ways at the user side, but we also recognize that they're embedded in other groups, and they interact with lots of other people. The organization has to change, and so we look at the individual learning aspect, especially on the informal and non-formal side. And we look at it as to how it intersects with groups and with organizations. So how do you design the environment? What does the organization have to look like? What does the culture look like? What does the climate look like? What do managers have to do differently in order to support that learning? What does coaching look like? Why is there such a transition now to so much coaching for those who are on the higher end of the talent pool, and other people don't have that kind of thing? So these are some of the interesting challenges and questions, you know, on the implementation side of some of the shift that's going on that I deal with. We have graduate programs at the master's and doctoral level, and we have an executive doctoral program. So a lot of our people are dealing with these questions now in their organizations, and we get the benefit of hearing all these different and interesting things that are going on right now.
Hi, I'm Paul Fama from GE, and I'm the Global Learning Leader based in our Crotonville facilities, about 45 minutes from here. Been with GE 25 years, always in HR, moved my way from talent development to the learning space in the last couple of years. And, you know, for me, it's hard to talk about learning without talking about just the transformation that a company like GE has been through just in the last couple of years, because you just don't hang out a learning shingle without understanding what's going on in the business. Because, you know, the world has changed, the portfolio has changed. You know, we've become a even more global company. We've tried to become a digital company at the same time. All those things have implications for, you know, the learning space. At the same time that the learning space seems to be in not just transformation, but in a revolution at this point. I mean, if we went to a learning conference 10 years ago and said, how many people here are from entrepreneurial companies or investment people who want to buy into these companies, it'd be zero. And so here we have it, is that there's so much going on that we have to get our hands around. And it goes from the macro level, from a company standpoint, right down to how do we teach our classes going forward. We're experimenting with every tool you could think of: MOOCs, gamification, you know, we flatten classrooms, you know, just every technology you could think of. And we're having not only to deal with this kind of change, but, you know, having people who come not just from multicultural backgrounds, but multi-generations, but also different abilities in terms of how to deal with technology. And that difference matters. I mean, I just told a story before. I was reading a book to my 9-year-old daughter, Stuart Little by E.B. White, and she asked the question, well, could we read the sequel? Because there's always a sequel, right, in movies. And so I said, I don't know. And we started arguing about whether E.B. White was a man or a woman. So I go to Google thinking that I'm, you know, a big digital, you know, learning leader, and I pull up a list of sources that we could look up this information. She grabs my phone away from me and she goes, hey Siri, is E.B. White a man or a woman? So the differences now are profound and dramatic, and us as a learning community really need to try to keep up with those challenges.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So let's open it up to the floor. Who'd like to kick it off with a question for our panel? And if you don't, I may volunteer you. Come on, you're all.
Or we'll
in the
just
learning
drone
space.
on about stuff that you don't care about.
Go ahead, please.
Can you discuss what your expectations are in a learning management system? So, for example, I'm contemplating a business venture. One of the big one of the things that I have to explore is what type of learning management system do I put in place in order to deliver the content. And those systems have evolved a lot.
Therapy, what is that?
No,
No,
we
we
heard
got
you.
it.
So how do you envision what today's learning management system should look like in order to be effective and engaging and profitable for a business?
So I'll say, we're going through this right now because as the HR transformation is going on, there's a LMS that's being proposed as part of that stack. We're adopting Workday. That's public knowledge. And so Workday, yeah. And so Workday's got an LMS that they're working on. I think they were partnering with Cornerstone or something like that. But to be honest, I am less concerned about an LMS, and I'm more interested in an LRS, a learning record store. So what are people doing with the content versus are they completing it? And I use the analogy, if I gave you an egg salad, well, whatever your favorite sandwich is, mine's egg salad. So if I gave you a sandwich and you took, you know, a bunch of bites out of it, but you set it down and didn't finish it, the LMS would say you didn't get anything out of that. But the LRS would say, yeah, you got something out of it. You consumed what you needed. You may not have been hungry. You may have already had something else. You may have something else big coming up, so you don't want to ruin your appetite. So for me, it's more about consumption of content and not just the fact, you know, the binary of did they touch it or not, but did they touch it? How many times did they touch it? How long did they touch it? So the geospatial, the temporal data that goes around the clickstream data, where did they click on it? All of that content to me is more rich and valuable to help build algorithms that then can be the basis towards serving up more personalized learning. The learning management system purely is a legal regulatory compliance engine that lets me say, yes, we did at A, B, and C, and here's the record for it. But it does, from a learning perspective, doesn't really tell me how educated my population is.
Paul, did you have something to add to that?
Sure. The question for me is not what LMS should I pick, but what do I want, what outcome am I trying to drive by having a record-keeping system? I mean, to build on, before we used to think about it more from a compliance standpoint. So if I'm in the aviation business, and I'm a supplier to Boeing, they want to know traceability of everything that we do to make sure that we are absolutely compliant. So that's a good use of that kind of system. But several years ago, we built our own internal Brilliant U, we called it, where people can find different learning activities, whether it's a video, whether it's a self-generated content, whether it's a blog, a course, a book, an abstract. And in fact, that has kind of taken over the front end of what we would traditionally think of an LMS, because an LMS is not the way people learn. People learn by interacting with systems, and there's, it's amazing how far consumer systems have come as everyone is shopping during the holidays. Does anybody ever go to a sock repository to look for socks, or do they go on Amazon, in order to, look for a present for someone? And somehow we haven't made that transition yet as a learning community. And I think an LMS is kind of one of those systems that you have to have it, but it's not the way that our users interact with data.
Different systems, don't they support different types of engagement?
Yeah.
So the learning has to be engaging.
Right.
So it has to be interactive. It has to test their knowledge.
Right.
So do some of these LMSs do that better than others, or is that something that's layered on top?
Yeah. From our perspective, and when we're relooking our LMS system as we speak now, there's a great promise out there of interactivity, of bringing things together into one system so that you can have that kind of interactivity. I think it's going to be a few years before you actually see it, and it's not going to happen by itself. I think you and your team's ability to interact with that and make it what you want it to be, I think is going to be the key to success.
And I would also say, so your follow-up question about that is what is your learning strategy? What's your user-generated content strategy? What's your digital strategy? So if you got to get all those strategies in alignment so you understand what it is you're trying to service, what is your brand of learning for the company, that'll really help drive the selection of the right technology stack, because it's going to be a mix. There is no one tool out there that does everything, right? Things like Degreed that they provide, they do a segment of that, but there's other things. There's the content providers that Degreed will help maybe aggregate, or it's going to be the suite of systems, in my opinion. So learning record stores, content management systems, learning management systems, user-generated video systems, think like a YouTube type of system. All of those, there's no one tool out there that does all that like they do in Workday, where you do kind of have the whole realm of HR. And even though they have that, there's still things like what's the I can't think of the name of the system, but they're like for recruiting. Brass Ring is the one I was thinking of. Like, there's things like that out there that will still meld into kind of an enterprise HRMS system, because they have a feature functionality that was more or less than maybe what we wanted. So it's going to be a suite versus a single product, in my opinion.
The only other thing I'd say, and you alluded to it earlier about the employee experience, is you have to have someone who's thinking about that all the time, because it's easy to let the technology overwhelm the experience rather than the user experience that you want to define drives how you configure your systems.
As a partner that integrates with LMSs, to be very blunt to be very pointed in your question, there are a wide range of LMS vendors and those that integrate with the kinds of stacks that they're describing. But the LMS market has matured and has had multiple phases, and you will find that there are varying perspectives, either a corporate-centric perspective, which is sort of the older perspective, and a more newer user perspective. And some of the younger LMSs have more of a user perspective that try to drive much of the engagement that my colleagues have been talking about. This is not my area of expertise, but.
Well, and also I think that a lot of companies are trying to integrate their talent management systems and their human resources information systems and come up with kind of one be-all, end-all system, which is probably not going to happen right away, and it seems to be that holy grail out there, but.
Well, and the data on that in the HR tech space is that, much like many of my colleagues in the room in the name of the conference, much like the ed tech space, there was a consolidation, i.e. Workday. And now the arc of that consolidation is reversing, and there are, maybe in the room, many entrepreneurs who are adding what would be historically called a point solution to that stack that, for example, would drive human capital engagement or employee population engagement through the learning process. And new entrants like my colleague from Degreed are sort of driving that kind of behavior because, as I think we can all appreciate, without that ongoing engagement, learning and development, this is a dirty word amongst my colleagues, is merely a compliance effort. And we want to avoid that because, as I think, and I think I saw him enter the room from the keynote this morning, learning is ongoing, learning is consistent and constant, and to your point, should be blind. And there are a lot of folks who are engaged in solving that problem.
I have a question. A lot of investors and some entrepreneurs and vendors in the space. Can you share your perspective on who are the vendors that are doing something really innovative, solving big and or acute problems that you are trying to solve, or I guess more solving? And I was going to say, you can't name Degreed in Bird Glass. So,
I was going to answer that for you, Arun, but I think you already know that.
Yeah, but is there others that are doing something innovative? And why is it innovative? What problem are they solving for you?
So there's, Lori just said actually, there's a big movement. If you go to a lot of the industry conferences, you hear people in learning talking about things like performance reviews and career development. But when you look at how those processes actually work inside big companies, it's literally different people with different tools and systems. And one of the benefits of moving to a tool like Workday is that people thought they could get everything in one place. But it turns out that no matter how good your user interface is, no matter how good your system is, they're still HR systems, right? And it's not the place that employees go every day to get their jobs done. And so they're always going to be missing some part of the process. So what the biggest trend that I'm seeing when I go either to talk to customers or to go and see what's happening at the industry events is the convergence of those three things: learning and performance and career development over the longer arc. And so just this week, there was a company called High Ground that bought another company called Yoi, putting together sort of a next-gen performance management system with an AI-enabled chatbot for coaching. Right? These are things that never existed before 2 years ago, and now they're being put together. Coaching is essentially learning, but it's being done now from the angle of the way that companies are trying to make their performance management process work in the future, not the way that it used to. It was, once a year annual, look back. Now it's a series of monthly or weekly conversations that are looking forward, and they want to plug learning experiences into that. I think that's really exciting. And they're not the only ones doing that.
I'm not sure I'm going to name companies, but I know that there's some things out there, and the integration piece is one. You looked at the Lynda.com's, LinkedIn, Microsoft, suite, which is how people work, and are they going to embed learning into that and go from there? But I'm more intrigued with companies who are going to overcome whether we really need to customize culture anymore, or can that come in a package? Because for me, that's the thing that's been the most difficult thing to duplicate. Because I go to a lot of conferences and people have a tool that's going to help me solve a problem, but you haven't lived in my environment or know what it's like or know how people talk to each other when it comes to performance development and giving feedback and how that's done. So I'd be looking for companies that, for me, help build that bridge, and don't say I'll do it with you, because that just means I'm going to do all the work and I'm going to have to pay forever for your technology. So if you really come in with an automated version of how I could plug my culture into whatever tool you're using, then I think you have something special.
One other thought here. I think this industry isn't talking enough about AR and VR yet, but it's coming, and it's coming fast. You know, the idea isn't that these things replace the kinds of content we have today. It's that they change the nature of the job of doing learning. It's not just creating content to teach people how to do stuff. It's giving them the support where the work is actually happening. Like Mark said, making the learning invisible. You don't need to learn how to do something if you've got somebody literally pointing in front of your face, showing you how to, you know, tighten the bolt, assemble the wing, whatever it is.
So I'll say, kind of stole my thunder a little bit, but that's okay. One of the things we're doing at Boeing is we're going to, so we talked about this workday, right? That's you know, end to end on human resources for all people data, and that's performance and career development and all of that. With the airplanes, we're actually doing the same thing. We're going to a single system from end to end, from initial conceptual design all the way through our production systems. It's one single digital thread. You even hear the term out there, digital twin. I know GE is doing that as well. One of the things we're looking at is trying to suck up that digital exhaust from those systems, so that it's a lot of tool training, right? We've got people that have to use, right now that whole suite's probably 2,500 different systems across our enterprise. And so you figure you've got at least an operator class on every single one of those. Then you've got more, you know, involved programs. We've probably got 6,000 or 7,000 classes just on tools alone. What I'd like to be able to do is figure out, you know, we write the processes. You have to follow the process and go in these steps. If you can capture that digital exhaust of how people are actually doing it, you can start to surface patterns on what is the most efficient way to do that. And so then, again, a client that sits on top that captures those keystrokes and clicks and then says, okay, you know, you're about to do this, but 98% of the people that do this work click on this instead of that. Are you sure? And so that can help start. So you're not really training, but you are, right? It's not a class, but you're getting, it's essentially that intelligent tutor that's preventing you from making the problem without having an army of people sitting over your shoulder telling you that you're about to make that mistake. And then with that, we can see where the most common, if you did like a heat map, you could see what are the most common errors or places where people have consternation. And then you can create targeted performance support for those more complicated or ambiguous areas. And so for me, it's gathering of all this data is really going to become the hotspot. The newer systems are going to have it built in. I know in our partners that they're doing that, but there's all the legacy systems. And so there's some companies we're talking to about, you know, how do you capture that content and then help even build your procedures and processes dynamically after you put a group of, you know, 50 experts through it. They already know how to do it. Let that generate the data automatically. That content. So to me, and it's more of a knowledge management skew that I've got here, because now I'm capturing that without having to capture it, if you will, right? Because you know, a lot of times I'll get we'll go through a process. Somebody at the end of it, a program's over. Hey, we have to go capture lessons learned. Development program on an airplane is 15 to 20 years. So the people that are there at the end of the program probably aren't the ones there in the beginning of the program. So you've lost all of that at the end. So you have to be able to figure out how can you capture it real time in the process of work. Because the other thing that I'll be asked too is if I say, hey, let's go do a lessons learned, they'll say, what's your charge line, so that I can charge my engineers time against that because it's not on the program. But if I can get it as an embedded part of how they do their work, I think that's really where there's just not a lot out there that does that kind of stuff. But we've got the computing power. We've got, you know, this is a $6 million man, right? We've got the technology. We can rebuild it. So we've got to figure out how we can capture that real time so that it is, you know, not this monumental effort after everything's already all done.
Well, it also becomes user-generated content.
Absolutely.
Right? So it's not someone in a bubble designing a course. It's based on what learners are actually doing.
Right. Well, and I think there's two categories there too. There's authoritative and non-authoritative content. So for us, the aviation example that Paul mentioned, we have FAA certifications. That has to be an authoritative. There may have to be reviews for that kind of stuff. But other things like leadership, just because I have a particular style doesn't mean if I'm teaching that style to you that it works with you in your style. And so, and I'm sure you have plenty of different ways you could go about that. That's non-authoritative. That becomes the democratization of this content as you figure out what works best for you and your style and your culture.
So I actually want to ask you about the teachers today. So they seem a little bit more liberal and might not encourage companies as Boeing or GE. They might not want to talk about engines or even gas, oil, fracking or all those things. So, but when you go to college, you actually get to hear about these things with your professors because they actually have departments for construction, all those things. So, what corporations think about having teachers that are more liberal and might not talk about these things that might be useful to them in real time when they work for you guys? Do you have a perspective on that?
So I'll just say our instructor's job is to teach the topic that they're given. And so we don't necessarily teach classes in philosophy or other things like that. There has to be a business reason for that. That doesn't mean that our population doesn't get educated on that, but that's actually where we do rely on our university partners or other external third-party providers of learning for that. It's because we want to have that perspective. We don't go all to one university for recruiting or for providing. We have a suite of 72 schools that we have partnered with across the globe because we want to have different perspectives. You don't want to get that same that groupthink going on if you do get from those. So for me, it's just the topic. If I've got an engineer teaching a class on thermal transfer, right? They're not going to be talking about, I guess conservative or liberal instructor doesn't necessarily fit in that particular space. If we have leadership development, you'll see more of that. So it kind of depends on the topic area that you're in. And that's why we leverage not just our own instructors, but a wide variety of external partners as well.
Victoria, you might have a little bit of a perspective on that.
Yeah, I think it's also true in universities. So, for example, we have people who are in the learning and development space who come and take our programs, et cetera. But we don't really, I think, speak from a liberal or not liberal point of view. We're looking more at what it is that the issues are or challenges they bring and kind of constructing ways to think with them about how to best solve them and also to bring the best of the latest information. For example, at Columbia, we have, and many universities now, there's a lot with neuroscience research that helps us to better understand how people learn and how to facilitate that and really what to avoid and what to capitalize on. So we're more in that space. In fact, we strive very much to not speak politics in our classes because people have strong views based on their backgrounds and interests, and it is meant to be a place where we talk about ideas and not necessarily viewpoints behind them that might not be, central to what it is that people are learning. So I think that many universities probably take that perspective at that level.
Yeah, with a company of 330,000 people from all over the world, we encourage as much diversity in thinking in every way possible. The only thing I tell you is that when we talked about employee engagement, we really hit hard inclusiveness, but I'm not sure that that's the right emphasis from the standpoint is people were not approaching conflict because they wanted to be inclusive. And so now we're moving more toward Lencioni's model of, 5 dysfunctions of the team, an ideal team player, where you want to have a way to have constructive conflict no matter what people's viewpoint. In fact, being too polite these days, within a range, can actually be more destructive to the team because you never get the issue out on the table. Now, I think companies are somewhat different than larger society from the standpoint of the range of issues we'll deal with in the boardroom, but it's amazing when you start to really build teams and how personal you have to get with each other, you have to have a way to deal with that kind of conflict. So whether the professors or wherever people are come are conservative or liberal or everything in between, we hope we have a system that could cope with that.
And just
So I just wanted to rephrase my question. This is not what I meant. What I meant is from early on, they won't be taught about oil and gas and engines. But when you come to colleges, yes, it is talked about. There are departments doing that.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, if you look at our teachers, they will not talk a good thing about fossil fuels. They will not. They'll talk about, you know what?
Have you ever been to Houston?
I think schools, I mean, what I've heard, what I've experienced is they will never talk about good things of fossil fuels. So, but then when you come to college, you realize, oh my God, there are good opportunities, you know, these are bad things. So how do you cope up with that? That's what I really meant. That's what I meant about your perspective in that. Liberal arts versus STEM.
Mark, did you have something?
Well, I have a slightly variant perspective on that, and that is when you unpack all the learning that you're articulating, it's probably as much about skills as it is about anything else. And what we find, and I think my colleagues would agree, is that as we evolve and as work evolves, the hybridization of roles and the number of skills that are needed to be effective at a particular job changes. And so I'm taking your point to one step further to say, in early learning, they may or may not talk about a particular topic such as fossil fuels or whatever the point may be, but I think where we really need to focus our energy is allowing and understanding that it will take a wide range of skill sets to be successful moving forward. And accountants need communication skills. How do you gather those communication skills and glean those from an education system that continually hones you into a particular point of view? And the corporate learning environment is then relied upon to give you those alternate skill sets. And that's a perspective that I think is evolving and is becoming more and more enlightened. And we're seeing more and more corporate learning partners needing to not just teach engineers engineering, but to teach them communication skills, et cetera. So maybe turn it back over to the panel lead.
I think there was another question in the back.
Quick announcement. We want to make sure that the questions are picked up on the camera. If you have a question, raise your hand up in the mic.
Hi. First of all, thank you for all the valuable insight. I had a question about specifically for the work part of the workforce, which are not in front of the screens, the ones on the floor, the tools, the operators. Especially in that, what are the challenges for training, retraining, in terms of whether it's technology or creating content or updating content, specifically in that area? What we would like to see as outcomes, and also on the side note, like, is virtual reality playing any significant or advantageous role in this area?
All right, so two questions. I'm going to tackle them. You might have to remind me of the second one, and you guys let me know if I get too long-winded, because this is actually a sweet spot for me. So we have about 80,000 factory workers that are down on the floor putting together airplanes, submarines, missiles, whatever, around the world. And anytime they have to go to class, they're not being productive, and that's a cost. And that's a huge cost for Boeing. It's measured in, I think, starts with a B as far as time off of the line getting work done. So anything that we do has to be able to enable that individual to get the work done without having to come off the line. And so we measure things in tenths of an hour, so 6 minutes. If it takes more than 6 minutes, then they have to charge it differently on the line. And so the learning that we have to do has to be enabled to allow that to be consumed within 6 minutes. So you're talking about it's the moment of need, but it's the moment of need of information in the workflow. And so whether we have, and we've tried to tackle it a number of different ways. We have workstations down that the technicians can go to. But again, it's got to be super easy where they can come up, tap it, log in, however, as quickly as possible, and the absolutely fewest clicks as possible to get to the content they need. So if we could make it more aware of this process they're in or the state they're in, that helps. We have looked at things like Google Glass or HoloLens, that are wearables that the technicians can have to throw up some augmented reality. It's okay. It's not real great. It actually it introduces a whole nother set of hazards potentially on the shop floor, especially if they have earbuds in and now your spatial awareness. You run into something. You're not just running into something. You're also jabbing those things into your ears or onto your forehead. So there's safety considerations for wearables as well. So it's a challenge, but I think it's a good challenge that we're having. The other thing is it has to be scalable. To say that I'm going to put a $100 piece of equipment on 80,000 employees is not really scalable. It's got to be something that's low cost, something that's shareable. Again, if it's a wearable, now you're talking potentially EHS because you have to sanitize as you shift between because you don't want any industry-borne illness, things like that. So for every pro you have on things like that, you've got a con that makes you go, "Ooh, I'm not exactly sure how that's going to work." Anything else that we're thinking of? Tablets. Tablets are easy, but again, this is not cheap. We talked a little bit about bring your own device in those spaces. The only problem is we have export trade controlled content, import export. So the security of the data on there on a personal device that we can't apply securities to becomes a challenge. So, like I said, every time you have a pro on one way to do it, there's a consideration that we have to have. We've not figured it out yet, but we're trying to go down that road. Another way, if you've ever been, and this is just me spitballing at times, you ever go to the airport and they've got these big video walls and you're trying to kill some time and it can kind of see you and you can make shapes and it reacts to you and things like that. If we had something like that you could use for an entire line, that they can just walk up to the station, it recognizes them based on either facial recognition or something like that, and they could talk to Alexa or Siri or whatever and say, "Hey, I'm on this step, help me out." Using a lot of that data and knowing where the people are logged into the system, what job ticket they're running, that might help us get to that quickly so that they're more apt to use it. I also have found an interesting thing. People will swear at Alexa and Siri, but they won't at a computer screen when you're just clicking through. You're like, "Alexa, I want to do this," and Alexa's like, "Sorry, I didn't get that." And you're like, "You dirty," you get mad at the Alexa. It's I've actually found it quite interesting, the emotional response you get when these AIs say something wrong to you. So, there was a second half, wasn't there?
VR.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, that's an actually interesting thing. I swear I'll try to be quick on this. Historically, like when they built the 747, they went from drawing it up on a piece of paper to going ahead and putting it together and all the problems that go from no iteration in design. Then, as they got past that, they get into other platform designs and they do mock-ups, but they'll do them in wood or plastic or 3D printed materials just to make sure that everything fits together before you go actually build it. But they can still only afford to do that 2 or 3 times. It's very costly, time-consuming. You're putting, you've got a 22-step procedure and you find step 18 would have had better done at step 8. You have to take it all apart and rebuild it with that and see if it all still works. Now with like the HTC Vive, we've got virtual mock-ups that we can do and literally put the plane together, directly exported right out of the 3D design systems that we have. And so we can do dozens of iterations to see if things fit together. You can have a virtual drill that, it doesn't fit, there's a collision there. So even though the parts fit, you can't get the tool in there. So we can iterate and we can do that quickly. And the reason I'm so excited about it is every time we do one of those, we have learnings that we capture from that. And those learnings are now getting embedded into my knowledge management system as little individual objects so that because we may not build another plane for 10 years. Now, in our defense side, we might build a jet or a fighter or this or that. So how do we share that and make it readily available? And something we learned on the wing might actually work on the tail section or the empennage or so all those, being able to bring those together and those learnings. So the VR isn't necessarily helping me teach them, it's helping figure that stuff out, but the learnings we're getting from the ahas they're having is then going to be able to help me teach. So, all right, I'm done.
Todd, I think a lot of companies are not as far along as Mark and the folks at Boeing, based on what you said before. How do you?
I'd say that's right. I mean, like, it's actually a really timely question for me. I visited 2 factories this week. One where they make windows, one where they were making air conditioning and heating equipment. What I saw is that, you know, there's a lot of companies that are using technology to make the learning available where the work is happening. And that's one approach, but that's also basically just an extension of the sort of traditional role of the learning function, which is to create and disseminate and push out content, right?
It's not learner pulled in.
What I'm also seeing more and more of lately, and I think AT&T is the poster child for this stuff, the HBR and New York Times and Fortune articles talking about how they're reskilling their workforce. What I see more and more these days is that this job of reskilling the workforce, especially when it comes to the blue-collar workforce, companies can't do everything for everybody. They've got to share some of the load with the individuals, with their managers. And so what they're doing instead is they're doing all of those things. But on top of all of that, they're also trying to create an environment where people can connect to whatever resources they need when and where they need them. That could be at home. But it could be at work. So they're doing everything from, you know, book clubs in the company cafeteria to giving people access to mobile training and learning that they can take 24/7 anywhere they go. So there isn't one right answer for this.
Yes, so I'm wondering if you guys can comment on what you're seeing in terms of learning as a benefit. Things like tuition reimbursement programs or college loan repayment programs, things like that, that would incentivize your workforce to achieve higher levels of education prior to joining you or while they're employed.
You know, we've looked at it many different ways, but it's so available within us, it already is, you know, pretty well embedded. So to artificially put it into the benefit category for us never seemed to get traction. We do know, we just did a study recently and took our top 6 courses that people went to, and the average attrition at GE is somewhere around 6%. But the people that we had go through those classes, and we studied them over a 3-year period, went down to 1 to 3%. So we know that training does equate to retention, which is that benefit factor, which I think ultimately is the outcome that you're looking for. Is the company investing in me? Does the company care about me? Do I have things that I value? And I could also tell you that this next generation values skills, as you talked about, even more so than previous generations that maybe thought it was more of an entitlement than it is a clear activity.
Dan, did you have something on that point?
So at Boeing, we've got, we call it our Learning Together program, and that's where our tuition reimbursement is located. And so we don't actually do tuition reimbursement, we do tuition prepayment. And it may be a simple consideration, but if you think about somebody that's trying to get better at what they're doing, they have to go and pay whatever college, course costs. And then if they don't pass, then, the company's not out or anything. The problem is, like I did it when I was at a couple companies ago, I actually had to take a loan out as a student, as employee of the company. I had to take a loan out to be able to take the class. And then as soon as I got my tuition reimbursement from the company, then I paid the loan off. And I had to do that every semester, every quarter, until I graduated with my master's degree. And so it's a minor little thing, but if you're talking about user experience, I'm totally more interested in a company that's going to do prepayment and then come after me for the money. If I don't get the satisfactory grade, then it is going to be for me to have to go and secure a loan every single semester for a couple of years I'm working on it. The other thing we've done is we've extended our programs to certifications. So we've got a whole list of professional certifications that we'll pay for directly, as well as I'm a huge fan, and I know Paul is too, because he beat me to the punch with edX. But we're using edX and massively open online programs that are accredited by universities as part of that. So even though edX is not an institution, we'll prepay their programs as well, because they are tied back to that accredited universities.
Make sure employees aware
So there's a number of things. As we have new programs or new partnerships announced, we do a big communication blitz. Like we did a program with NASA, MIT, and edX on model-based systems engineering. There's a four-class certificate from MIT out of their systems engineering department. So we had a huge communication. I think at this point we're over.
How do you tie what I am to be learning to either my career path or at a higher level to what the company is trying to accomplish? I'm not literally saying that. I'm literally asking that question of you two. How do you do that? How do you present a line manufacturer with what they need to learn in order to advance their career, not 5 theoretical steps, but literally to that next step to provide better life-sustaining wages for them and their families? How do you go about doing that?
Not very well. I mean, because when you think about it, Paul said 330, we're about 150,000 around the world. The sheer number of roles, it's the ability to define the next step for every employee at that scale is it's challenging, right? And here's the thing, by the time we had a team of people that could go through and do that, it's all changed, right? Because as the technology changes, as the needs change, additive manufacturing, how many people even thought of that 3 years ago? Additive manufacturing in the workplace, right? So now, I mean, we're building blade parts, jet engine parts in 3D printing. We're building, we're additive printing titanium. None of this stuff existed 5, 6, 7 years ago, and so by the time we could track all that out, and then who knows what you don't know yet. So that's the challenge.
When we went into kind of the digital space, we didn't software engineers. The worst is the good news is we started from scratch, created an integrated talent management system from the time you hire someone up into the development cycle, so you know exactly what that direction looks like. And that's a niche, within the whole lots of jobs we could possibly have. That's probably our best example. So people know that here's what's interesting to my next level progression. We've tried it in terms of control titles and engineering function too that helps map that and map that. In the hourly space is the easiest because there's clear levels that are dictated by contract. The interesting space now is kind of a mid-level professional because they don't have those needs, and that's the space that's probably changing the most when it comes to analytics and mid-level analysts that are having jobs change regularly.
Paul, in your LMS, do you have those kind of learning pathways or pathways and say, okay, I want to get that next level. Here's my suggested training. I need to write a book or.
What's interesting is none of that is happening in the LMS. It's happening outside the LMS and kind of an internal entrepreneurial venture and an integrated talent management. It's happening in kind of our learning space in another space that just has grown up. And now we're starting to see more and more people who might have even better solutions for this. It's happening in schools.
Yes.
Karen.
Yeah.
Great example.
Hi, so Boeing and GE obviously have the overhead to support learning management systems. Smaller businesses, nonprofits, medium-sized businesses might not. So what solutions are actually providing the same quality and specialization in that learning management system and style to those kinds of businesses?
Nothing ever replaces a manager who understands who works for them and what jobs they're doing. That's the thing that's the least expensive and the one that we probably spend the least amount of time getting excellent. So we could talk about all the technology and using VR and AR and everything in between. But at the end of the day, do managers know what their employees are doing? I mean, people talk about leaders as coach, but what happened to leaders as teachers? From the perspective of I have certain amount of expertise that I can share and make sure people are on track. You know, so, because I've consulted and we do best practices share with a lot of companies, big and small. You know, they always get impressed by a campus or a big system that we have. But at the end of the day, if that doesn't work, that interaction between the manager and the employee or whatever the hierarchy works, then it doesn't count. That's, you know, you can see it in the entrepreneurial companies that are out there, because they're a small, tight-knit group, and no one worries about levels or hierarchy. They just have a job to do. And so that would be a space to explore without worrying about infrastructure. We work on that soft piece, and that works, and then come back and tell us that you need a big LMS to make it.
Well, I think, too, that the cost of an LMS has come down. When I first started the training magazine, everyone was investing millions of dollars in these ginormous LMS systems that were going to track completions, and they were going to track what the next step in the learning was, whether you're going to be certified or not. But you can get an off-the-shelf system that doesn't cost that much to do those types of things, make sure that you have compliance. But these days it seems to go beyond just that. It was like that Paul mentioned on one of our calls was it's not so much about completion, it's about consumption, right? And that's really what we're looking about today. And not just the fact that you took the training and checked the box, but what you really got out of it, and what was the change in behavior or the business impact that came out of it.
I would make a slightly different argument about this, which is that if you think about what most companies stop their LMSs up with, there's literally 1,000 LMSs out there on the market from every conceivable price point, from every conceivable application. A lot of them have value. But when you look at what's inside them, it's mostly classes and courses. And when you look at how people use them, it's every once in a while. There are occasional events for a small part of the population. So when you think about the efficiency of that as an investment in your company, there are so many other things you could be doing with that money. You know, what Paul's company is doing is well documented, really new, but you know, just think about how people pick up skills and develop the knowledge they need to do their jobs already in the organization. It's mostly informal, it's mostly through interactions with other people, so Paul's comment about coaching is relevant, but it's also just all of the everyday habits we have, solving problems on the job, or reading things and sharing things. And right now a lot of that stuff gets sort of pushed under the covers through email or through Slack and PM or social activities. Lots and lots of learning is happening. Channel that activity, you can get a handle on it, you can get a lot more value out of that than just trying to grab people into an LMS that they don't need every day. So I would look at the problem differently.
I add just to that because I'm really in agreement with that way. And one of the things that one of my colleagues has been doing is to try to understand different learning paths. Because learning paths, it's great to have a learning rich environment that's generalized, and people who take advantage of that will. But there are other people who have particular preferences and needs, and less attention is paid other than the top part of the company to all the various people within the company, from which much more could be happening. And so but we don't understand learning paths. We don't understand the differences that people have. And so there is progress being made in understanding what different paths occur in terms of, for example, who plays the most influence on those paths, what kinds of structures are involved in those, and outside in terms of professional knowledge, is it more internally team problem solving, etc. So I think there is a space also there too to understand better what that learning trajectory means for people and being better supported.
When I think about the benefits of learning, we have probably 30,000 people come through our learning center. You know, content is the fourth most important thing that we got in that class. It's one, my manager sent me, and they think I'm important enough to learn something new. You know, second is they get exposure to role models who talk to them about their career paths and what was important to them. Three, they get a network of people they've never met before, and they get a broader perspective of the company and some relationships they didn't have before. That's, you know, doesn't cost as much as some of these other things that we're talking about. But I think the magic is
Would you comment on the gap between what industry needs and what higher education is producing? So for example, you brought up the point, we're producing accountants, but they don't know how to communicate. So what do you see we should be doing from an industry perspective to work more closely with higher education to ensure that the graduates that are coming out have the skills that you need, apart from what would be specific or unique to your own business?
Yeah, I think the first thing is semantics. I think we need to all begin to align around a common lexicon so that we do understand what each other are talking about. This is very much at the heart of what I do on a day-to-day basis. I can tell you dramatically how you guys talk about a set of skills and competencies is very different than the way that folks at Columbia do. And I think if we can, as industry and education, begin to coalesce a taxonomy that is pervasive and ubiquitous, it will go a long way towards helping bridge what is a defined and definitive skill gap, so that industry can effectively communicate to your network of 72 higher ed partners around the globe exactly what they're trying to get from that group, not at a high level, not at an aggregate level, but at a very granular level. You likely do forget what we call them, focus groups basically. But that is so subjective to the bias of the stakeholders coming into that it becomes almost more detrimental. And conversely, my colleagues in academia hold industry focus groups where they bring 13 local people into their shop with the president of the university sometimes and talk about what industry needs, but they do it from a very biased, undata-driven perspective, and one that is not grounded in a common lexicon. That to me is a crucial component.
The word that comes to mind for me is interdisciplinary. We talk about horizontal organization compared to anybody else. So I think fostering that interdisciplinary thought helps us a lot, not because we're necessarily all the way there yet, but I think if we work together to shape our next generation that way, it'll help all of us.
I would say you have to think about this really from two types of students that you get at the universities and traditional. You have your traditional student, just graduated high school, 18 years old, never really had a job other than high school job, a real job. I hate to say that, real job, but versus, and that's a shrinking population for universities nowadays. That's as I talk with some of my partners, that the non-traditional student is the growing population, yet we're teaching them just like we teach those students coming out. We're not valuing the rich experience and diversity of perspective and allowing that to shine within the walls of the institution. So if you think about your non-traditional students, or your traditional students, I hear a lot of, we talk about pedagogy, right? But if you really talk about your non-traditional students, and you never hear, and I go to academic industry and all, you never hear andragogy. But andragogy is, yeah.
We teach that.
Right. And so finally I've heard, we go to, I was at a conference here, Learning with MOOCs, and it's really all about, academia teaching, adult learners, and yet they're teaching them as if they're children. And they're not. And they have the adult learner wants to be self-directed, wants to know why it's important to them, wants to be able to share their experience and show how some of their experiences and apply it to this new situation. And we don't have our courses designed that way in academia for the non-traditional learner. So I think that's where the huge shift, that's where I think the micro-certificates, these micro-credentials that are coming out, tend to be more attractive to the adult learner because there is more of this peer-to-peer interaction, work-related projects, so it's what's in it for me, versus going back. I'll be honest, when I survey our internal workforce, most of them aren't interested in a master's degree or a doctorate degree or yet another post-secondary degree. They are interested in these credentials though, because that's where they're still relevant, right? They don't want to not be relevant, but they don't want to go off and invest 3, 4, 5, whatever years to get yet another degree that's going to have a half-life, you know, a couple years as everything keeps changing. So that's really where I think the intersection between industry, academia, and government, to be honest, government's got to be involved, and you know, the accreditation bodies that help kind of, you know, just like our speaker said this morning, the College Board, we have to get these accreditation boards to change how they view, because even if the university wants to change, they may lose their accreditation for those programs, which then means people don't want to go to them, and it just becomes this vicious cycle. So it's got to be a three-way partnership.
Do you also see more of a focus on communication skills? We talked about a little bit about now that millennials are coming in, they communicate via their phones, via text. The interpersonal conversation, the art of interpersonal conversation seems to be dying a little bit.
It's certainly not. It is the #1 what we call baseline skill, or commonly known as soft skill, across the globe, across all industries, all sectors, all roles, by 7.2%. It is the #1 baseline skill that
You know, on this brilliant platform, we put in a special engineering set of courses. And there was one course in there called How to Make Small Talk, and that one went viral. So it just, and that's not, we didn't even advertise that one. It was just founded, and that link was sent around everywhere. So we know that demand is there.
That also speaks to the point that we're making around, you also about the interdisciplinary and the piece, because I think there actually are many universities that are moving more towards that kind of approach. So it's not so clear cut, it's that way, don't all go in that direction, but it is only in the process of doing things together that you learn how to do these things, you know, because it's not just idle small talk, which is nice for dating, but it's also really how do you communicate with people across these multiple boundaries, you know, how do you use their language, how do you, where are the T skills, like the transfer skills that are important for people across different functions, and so I think universities are actually moving in that direction. I think it's dependent to some extent on how the high school. I remember being in the very early stages where assessment processes came in, and they have been disastrous. That's my point of view, because it's not that things should not be assessed, but assessed is the lowest common denominator. And without the board, a lot of the things that we're talking about in terms of cognitive skills, being able to put together on things, arts and sciences are arts that, in using the general things in the brain that help learning in other areas go out the window because you have to test for math and science and so English skills. So I think we have to really take a hard look at our whole educational system and how we do this. And I don't know where the courage is going to come to do that.
Right. Well, and when you get into assessments, that's a whole other hot button. You measure what you can, not what you should, right? You think about how many in here in the industry, you know, do level 1, level 2 assessments when they do their classes, right? With smile sheets, because those are easy to do, and you gather lots and lots of data, but with no real meaning, right? Where what's most impactful in things I'm sure that Paul and I look at is what's the impact of the business, right? I really don't care whether you like the class or not. In fact, there was an article in Training Magazine years ago, are you too nice to teach, right? Because you can manipulate those scores to be really good. Oh, I love that instructor. What'd you learn? I don't know, but they gave us candy and donuts, and you know, yeah. So all of those anything you assess, you can manipulate, right? And so, right. Then the other thing I would say, and I don't know why, maybe I'm a Gen Xer technically, but I probably identify with millennials more from a behavioral standpoint. And so I always just have this reaction whenever we talk about millennials, right? They're not this category of people that like, I hate the generalization, you know, don't put me in a box, and I know by saying don't put me in a box, that puts me in a box of type of people, but, so I appreciate the irony there, but I also think it's you can't take the personal out of personal development, right? You actually have to talk to people, and you have to talk to them how they communicate, and not how you communicate. I mean, I'll tell you with my team, we Snapchat, we text, we call, we talk, you know, we FaceTime, we do all kinds of different ways because whatever we need to do at that moment is that's why we choose that modality. So I think communications, if anything, is more difficult because you have so many choices nowadays, and how do you choose what's the right one? You know, again, I kind of go back to that authoritative versus not authoritative. Don't Snapchat a design of an airplane with it goes away. Well, it doesn't really go away. But I mean, you need to, you're going to take a different medium to do a design review than a FaceTime potentially. You might want to have actual face-to-face in the room. But I just think communication is, everybody needs to learn how to communicate. Like how many people hear Snapchat? Okay, so like 5, 6, 8, maybe. There's 50. Yeah, see, I see it. See, so, but Snapchat. Yeah. But the thing is, how many? But I mean, that's the thing is you got to be able to, I hear it, it's like, well, we need to teach them better communication skills. We need to work on our communication skills too, to talk to them in that medium as well. Because it's a very effective form of communication for that form. So why not? It's like, I remember when I was a little kid, don't listen to music. You got to, the way my parents always told me to do. And so I listen to all their crap music, but I appreciated it. But then again, I would say that my kids probably think my music's the crap music now. So you got to be able to at least shift.
Every 6 months or so, you see these kind of silly articles in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal about the executive or technical Snapchat teams teaching them how to use something like Snapchat. And it seems silly, but the point is, this communication goes two ways, and everybody has to be to communicate. So it is absolutely a foundational skill, but people don't necessarily have to walk on
especially in today's global environment, right? You're dealing with people all over the place, different time zones. Sometimes that is the most effective way. Any question?
Yes. A lot of the discussion of the panel has been what I call at the high end of the learning scale. People who are already have a post-secondary education, have a learning culture. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on how to deal with the lower skilled workplace and learners. How do we upscale the lower end of the workforce?
So we have a program that we use with local community. We're in Puget Sound, in Everett, in Seattle, in Washington, and we have 45,000 factory workers just in that region alone. And so we've actually helped build up the local high school system called Craft College. And so that we're teaching the aerospace skills that we need for people that don't want to go on and get a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree. But what are those airframe mechanic type license skills that we find valuable for factory workers in the Boeing company, because we continue to have it flow as rates go up and we're making big moves with customers. So getting in with the local high school system is a way that we help get those hands-on skills. I actually advise a local superintendents on curriculum. They're building a STEM. They're building another high school, and they're going to have it be a STEM specific. We actually encourage them to include the STEM stuff because we need that. But what about those other mechanical skills? And just how do you help build up that workforce? Because if you can't really partner with universities if they're never going to university to begin with to upskill. So we're looking at that vocational schools in the region.
So similarly, we partner with workforce development agencies, K through 12, community colleges, and work with primarily government agencies, workforce development agencies, to do that. And I think a key that we don't control but we wish that we could would be basically marketing those realities to that population. And I'm not sure any of us really know the answer to do that, other than it really is within the work environment.
I have a good example on that score of a colleague, Art Langer, who has a workforce opportunity program
is to implement the program. So, because one of the challenges, as he's explained it to me, and I understand that from the corporate perspective, is that it's hard for corporations to take the kinds of risks that you need with talented people who have not yet been in the workforce. But what they do is they work with, for example, they work with IBM, they work with people in Detroit in training people for service line operators, technical skills to people. Call up and they complain about something and they get the answer to it. But what they do is they identify these talent, they work with organizations, they raise money so that whoever joins their program gets a graduate degree, and while they're doing it, they go through a program in which people from the industry serve as apprentices and teachers in the classroom. So it's you bring the workplace to college, and they get apprentice people, and people have them that job for about 6 months. And many would stay in the organizations they apprentice with, but obviously the don't, and he's created a foundation where he runs it, but they outsource what they do. It's outsourced. But it's a combination because there's a lot of socialization skills, because organizations work in certain ways, and many people who are not going up in those kinds of social milieux have those skills, and so there's a very intensive effort to support them in all ways, financial help and other kinds of things. It's quite an innovative program. They work with vets in other countries as well. It's global. They work in Paris and France and the Netherlands, I think, in addition to places in the United States. So it's an interesting model for new job creation, particularly in tech areas where there's a real need for people that are not in the highlight.
So we have partnerships all over the world. I think the key is partnerships and leveraging where you have momentum. We just, we alluded to partnering with edX, to anybody who gets a MicroMasters in AI, or cloud computing, or cybersecurity, or supply chain in the state of Massachusetts next year. We're going to do it here. So you don't need a previous college education. All you have to do is finish the MicroMasters. In the city of Atlanta, we co-developed a community center with the Atlanta Police Department, Social Services, to create a safe place for kids to do homework, provide some coaching to them. In Africa, we partnered with a private university called ALU, which is in several countries in Africa, to develop a whole coding program. It's very basic that helps kids before they go to college to come up to speed there. In Saudi Arabia, we created an ops center for women to get trained so they can go to work in a country that not necessarily there are a lot of jobs for women. So I think the key is partnership and curating the experience. Because again, the information's out there. You don't have to work hard to get curriculum. Your imagination, in terms of how you work together, partnerships you're going to need in order to get that done. I think is where
also a follow-up question on that. Are those programs that are owned by the learning function at GE, or are these things that are owned by some operational person, by corporate social responsibility office? Where are they owned?
All the above. So again, it doesn't matter where it comes from. Sometimes, and this is when we talk about horizontal teaming, and that we have to get used to. Sometimes I'm in the lead, like on the partner with edX, I'm in the lead because I knew about that. I had those relationships. ALU, I have my learning leader for South Africa is the key there, but without the business leader in Africa, it never would have happened. In this city of Atlanta, it clearly was a public-private partnership that our GE fund was involved with, and in Saudi Arabia, it was really our local team in Saudi Arabia said, how can we help? And that was one of the areas that we thought. So again, the whole idea of working horizontally, just learning always have to be the lead if it's important learning, or sometimes I support, sometimes I lead, sometimes I'm a team player, it's those, and it gets complicated because I don't want to say, well, welcome to the new complex world we live in. And that's why in terms of teaching leadership now, you have to teach people to be in all of those roles. Going up doesn't mean you're not a team player.
No, it's why I asked the question. A lot of work in Bank of America. We have some things that work to target the military veterans and active service. But the
thing that they get a lot of attention for is their partnership with Huntington. That came out of their corporate social responsibility. It's not an HR issue, it's a business issue.
Yeah, well, and just a follow-up, because there was a question earlier about what else can academia do. And it's that horizontal, we refer to it as the flock of seagulls, right? Or a flock of birds, right? They're all working together, like not flock of seagulls, a whole different. No, but like a flock of birds, you have a different bird leading in the front of the bee, but as that flock changes directions for whatever wind or whatever, the different birds in the lead. And you got to think about being able to work in a team where I'm not the leader of the team, I'm a member of the team. I just might have the lead at a point in time. So in fact, when we call them more of our adaptive pods, where we don't actually say they're the team owner or the team lead. They all are members and they all have different roles, but depending on where you're at in that process, the person on point might be a different role. And so that's just a different, I know that's something that we're not good at it yet, we're working on it. But yeah, you have to be able to morph in this, we call it fluid environment. So.
You wouldn't mind repeating the question, please?
It was all about how do you create new knowledge and really try to push people to innovate as opposed to just disseminating knowledge that already exists. It's how do you really ensure employees or learners to innovate and create new knowledge and create new ways of doing things.
Good articles on this. Let's go. John Gable and John C. Brown. Exactly about this point. I've got one story from a client with MasterCard, and their business is being disrupted by every buzzword. And so they're as a corporate sort of priority, they're all trying to be more innovative, and they're doing a lot of foundational training on the skills required for that to build the scaffold. So how to build a prototype, how to lean startup principles, how to build a business case and get funding for an initiative, things like that. They're reconditioning managers to accept failure and to, as long as they do it in smart ways. But at a micro level, what I saw recently, which was really interesting, was they've got a team of people trying to figure out how to apply things like microservices architecture and blockchain, which mean nothing to most people, but apparently are very important to the future of how people are behaving with things. And there is no training material, there is no educational material. This is basic science. They're trying to figure out how they apply that stuff. And what they're doing is they're collecting stuff together, and they've got adaptive pods that are collecting materials, articles and books and videos from conferences they go to and projects they're working on. And they're sharing those with each other, getting together on teams, organizing projects and experimenting, documenting the results to share with everybody else. So there's an informal component, there's a formal component to learning what's happening around it, but they're making an active effort to apply learning in a different way to embed things, not just to share.
We have a question back here.
So I'm actually a high school educator, and so my question is, and I tell my kids this all the time, right now with the education system and the workforce where we're going, when you're a kid, if I give you a toolkit, you might build a house. If I picture the kitchen, you might make something, right? And at the end of the day, no matter what it is, we give these kids tools and they create something. And then when we start putting a label on them, like, oh, you built a house, you're going to be, an architect. You made a cake, so you're going to be a baker, right? And so we start to put these labels on them, and these kids come into the school system and like, well, this is what I'm good at because this is what I'm told I'm going to be good at. But at the end of the day, when you really look at the skill set, it's the same thing. They learn how to create. So kind of to follow up with my kids in the future in the workforce, some of them, and you're talking about non-traditional students, some of them have really rough upbringings, but they're really intelligent, they're really bright, and they have a lot of potential, but they're not the traditional student. So they're not learning the traditional way. But when they come into the workforce with a resume, the resume doesn't look like all their other peers, but these kids, some of them they're innovators, they're creative thinkers. So then my question is for companies, is the HR department, like how would a child be able to, how would one of my students own, like in their garage or as they're just on the side, maybe they don't come to school, but they're creating things or a niche industry that hasn't been thought of yet because it's not out there. Because what we're doing right now in the public education school system or whatever, it's like it doesn't really fit to their learning style, their learning need. But in the future, as a future employee, how is the HR like how would I help a student to go down that path and how to sell them, like not sell themselves and market themselves and present themselves as a valuable future employee, even though they don't look traditional. Right? And how does HR reconcile that or recognize that?
Well, actually, it really turns to what Dan and Burning Glass are doing, is they're not looking at the domain, but they're looking at the enabling skills. So, like presentation skills, like critical thinking, communications, all the components that make up that you may apply in a specific domain, but without a domain wrapped around it. And that's really what can help surface what the opportunities are for people that may kind of label themselves as A, but actually could do B, C, or D just as well because they've got those foundational skills. And that's a lot what their platform and their services do.
So, and the data is starting to present. So pendulums swing back and forth. And the pendulum is swinging back towards a skills-first mentality. So while I don't have a distinct and discrete answer for how a learner can present themselves effectively at GE or Boeing, what I can tell you is A, those folks may not want to present themselves to GE and Boeing. They may want to be like my colleague who's an entrepreneur. And or as organizations mature, they are taking, and the data is there, to show you that it is a skills-first mentality. So the resume as a tool to communicate skills is becoming less and less the central point as LinkedIn, et cetera, becomes more pervasive. And so being able to tie what they do to sets of skills that they have becomes a very valuable commodity. And one that, as these platforms that we're discussing today evolve, you can communicate to potential employees those skills. As a person who hires all day long, every day, I probably only look at a resume 25% of the time. I instead look at skills acquired through a wide range of tools that include LinkedIn, that include transcript tools that I use, etc., that articulate what the foundational skills are that they require.
Yeah, I think what you could be doing for your kids now is there are tools out on the market, things like Credly and Portfolio, that are meant to provide a warehouse, for lack of a better term, of evidence that shows that these people are building these skills. So if they're working on projects that demonstrate their creativity, their problem solving, whatever it is, they can collect that stuff and have it live somewhere. And the technology is evolving so that it will be quantified. When it becomes quantified, it will be turned into structured data. Once it's structured data, the applicant tracking systems that companies will start to value it. That world doesn't quite exist yet, but that's the direction.
The other thing is kind of our work now, which is we have to change our mindset from job titles, jobs, to problems are we trying to solve? What outcomes are we trying to drive? And if we could break it down to that level, then your kids, with whatever skills they have, you will welcome them if they can help us solve a problem. They don't necessarily have to be employed with us. You know, I've been with G 25 years. The chance of my son or daughter being with G 25 years is probably much less than it was for me. But for them, if we start to define these as outcomes and problems, they can feather in and find the right place to apply what they love to do, which is, I think, the promise of the gig economy that's coming out. The only other thing I'd add is the more self-awareness that kids have coming into the workplace, the better they are going to be in terms of adapting and evolving and being great team players. So those two things are help out.
We're just about out of time. I want to thank you all for the great questions and being here today. Before we go, I would just like to ask for a quick takeaway from each of our panelists. What are you most excited about coming up in next year?
For me, I spill the beans a little bit, but it's AI and it's the use of personal devices. We're talking about not there yet, but the possibility of like an Alexa at every workstation, so that as you're having problems, you can say, "Hey, Alexa," and you can ask the question, and she can answer you with the data. For me, it's you mentioned chatbots. One of you mentioned chatbots. That's think about it. If I have a question and I have a broad domain of data available that's mine, having a chat with I am people all day long. What's it matter if it's a person on the other end or a bot on the other end giving me the information back that I need in response? So to me, the AI, we're doing a number of research projects on it right now, trying to figure out how we can make it happen. So that to me is the most exciting technology thing coming here in next America.
The most exciting thing I see happening is the sort of continued breaking down of those barriers between learning and all of the other things that companies do with their people. Learning is generating lots of data, and that data has applications way beyond just learning. It has applications in operations, it has applications in workforce planning, recruiting, in managing people. We're starting to see the beginning of experiments with companies looking to take these things and much more seamlessly together, and that's really exciting stuff.
Actually, the most exciting thing for me was the last comment by Paul, and that was the maturation of learning and development of professionals focused on skills and competencies versus boxed job titles and really narrowing myopic roles. That's evolving.
I think, especially as I see some of the things that our students are working with, in innovation teams and different kinds of practices and behaviors and mindsets that are happening, those kinds of things is really very interesting and something.
Last word.
For me, it's this room. I mean, how many times do we get K-12 universities and the workplace together to talk about how you do development? And that's the continuum that we're working on, and because it's about performance consulting at the end of the day. We want our people, our teams, and our organizations to be the best they can be, and I see a lot of passion about that.
Thank you all so very much for joining us today. I thank all of you for